I'm curious if you can relate to this scenario. It's running up towards the deadline for your podcast episode to be published again, and you're just at a place where you feel in your soul at a zero, and you're just exhausted from the week, and you're really dreading the next episode that's going to have to be posted to meet your consistency for your podcast schedule. You don't feel like you have anything to give, and it's honestly, you're just not there. If you can relate to that, this episode is for you. In this episode, we're tackling how to be consistent and how to be sustainable as a creator, as a podcaster. And I'm excited that today we get to have a guest, Moses Kabandana. He's a guy that I met on Facebook through a Facebook podcasting group. He's got an awesome story, and I'm just thankful to have him on here today. He's a travel enthusiast that loves to share people's stories and bring people together through stories and podcasting. He's been creating content online for, I guess according to, about a decade and a half now. And so I think he's got some real words of wisdom for us and some nuggets of truth. And in this conversation, we tackle his early beginnings and what led him into content creation all the way through now. He's got Cabandana Academy, where he helps podcasters be sustainable in their podcasting and removing friction so that it makes more sense. And so if this is something you're struggling with, of just feeling burnt out and wondering how you can make this more sustainable, I hope this is an episode that can help you. If you're new here, my name is Kaleb, and this is the podcaster's journey. The goal here behind this podcast is to make podcasting more sustainable for you, and to just provide tools and resources and support to you along your podcasting journey, just like this interview today. So if you're brand new here, my call to action for you today, while you're listening, is to head on over to my Facebook group, The Podcaster's Journey. There'll be a link down in the show notes for you to check out while you continue to listen. But without further ado, let's get into this interview with Moses. All right. Well, Moses, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you taking time. You're in a different location than normal, so we were trying to get this set up with video. We're not going to be able to do that, but we've got audio. So why don't you tell the listeners where you're at and kind of what adventure you're on right now?
Awesome. Hey, Caleb, thanks again for having me on your podcast here. I am currently in a tiny town in North India. It's called Rishikesh. I think it's the headquarters, I suppose, of yoga here in India. And we're here precisely because my girlfriend is doing a 1 month yoga teacher program, which has now been extended to 2 months. We're having a good time. We're having a good time. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Have you guys been over there before, or this is your first time there in India?
So she's been here before, about 5 years ago or so. This is my first time in this neck of the woods. And but it's not our first time, traveling around the world. It's one of the things that we really, really love to do, is to experience new cultures, new foods, new music, and traveling is one of the absolutely best ways that we found to do that.
That's awesome. Do you guys get to travel quite a bit, or what is your? I mean, I know this is off topic for today's conversation, but I'm interested and curious.
Yeah. So yeah, we do travel quite often. For me, this part of the traveling, or this chapter of traveling, started about 3 years ago. I had this job, and I was living in LA, but it was a third shift job. And after about 4 months or so, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I can continue doing the third shift. And so right before I decided to quit, I was like, wait a minute, this is a fully remote position. I can just change time zones, So I just got up and left. I went to Portugal, of all places, primarily because I wanted to regain my fluency in Portuguese. I grew up speaking Portuguese.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
there was no better way to regain my fluency while maintaining a job, going from a third shift to a first shift. And so it was a no-brainer once that seed entered my mind, so to speak. And so that kind
Yeah.
of started the full-time traveling, and that led to me meeting my girlfriend in Portugal. And so since then, we've just been all over the place throughout Europe, Spain, Italy. I've gone to Belgium. I got some friends in Germany. We ended up buying a motorhome. A little side story here, but bought a motorhome, and
Okay.
we traveled throughout Europe, and spent a couple of months in Morocco living in the in the motorhome. And I think was it this year? Well, it's 2025. So last year, 2024, I think we did something like 7 countries or something, without, planning ahead of time. It was just so happened to to fall in our laps, so to speak. So the travel bug is certainly something that caught on to us before we met, and also once we met, we were like, okay, you're the traveling type, I'm the traveling type. Let's continue to do that. So that's a long story there, but yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So you guys did 7 countries kind of unplanned in your motorhome, just kind of driving and seeing where you end up. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the motorhome was in Europe and then North Africa with Morocco.
Okay.
And then 2024, it was just, we had this plan of visiting some countries in Central America. And then it turned into a short 2.5-month detour into Jamaica, and then back to Italy, and then the States, and then India by the end of the year. So
Nice.
yeah, a long
Wow.
detour.
Yeah, you guys are bouncing all over then, man.
Yeah. Are you a traveling type?
I would love to travel. I've been to Peru and I've been to Central America, and I've gone over to England and Sweden once.
Oh, sweet.
But I haven't been able to travel though to the extent that I would like to. I'm a little jealous listening to you guys' experience.
Fine.
That sounds like a blast. Someday I would like to visit all those places.
Yeah.
So
Did you pick up any Spanish?
until then, I guess I can. Pardon?
Did you pick up any Spanish when you were in Central America?
Yeah, a little bit. So I lived in Peru for like 3 months as a student missionary in college.
Sweet.
So I had so I guess random story on my end. In my undergraduate degree, I was studying piano, music, performance. Let me try that again. I was studying music with a degree in piano performance. And I'd injured my wrist in leading up to my graduation the last semester. And so I literally had to stop practicing and couldn't give my senior recital. And so I couldn't graduate in December like I was supposed to. And so I had to wait until May of the next year to graduate. And I was like, well, what am I going to do with this next semester? I don't have any classes left to take. And one of my friends was in charge of like student missions for our university. And I was like, hey, is there somewhere that you can send me in the world that I could go and serve for a few months? And so he found me a spot down outside of Pucallpa, Peru. So it was awesome.
Wow.
Got to go to Machu Picchu while I was there and travel around. We were going to go to Lake Titicaca, but we didn't make it there. But just seeing the Peruvian countryside, and the Peruvian people are just amazing. It was an awesome experience.
Dude, that's really sweet.
Yeah.
That's really sweet. My girlfriend, she also did 3 months in Peru. So that's really awesome.
She wants to go down there for 3 months?
She did. She went there.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So
What part of Peru is she in?
I have no idea, and I hope she doesn't watch this because she has told me that a million times.
Oh, I'm sorry, man. Set you up for that one.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
All good.
All right.
All good.
All right, Moses. Well, let's get into the theme or the idea for today's conversation. We're talking as creatives about how to sustain our creativity. And I want to jump into a little bit of your history and what led to you starting. You've got a couple different things that I want to talk about, but first I want to start with your podcast. And I just want to know if you can share some of the journey, maybe from your upbringing to becoming a podcaster, and what that looked like, what inspired you to start your podcast.
Okay, yeah. So as far as my upbringing, I'm gonna make a very long story pretty short. But I was born in Rwanda, and I grew up in Mozambique, and I didn't come to the States until about 2009, and by then it was like I like the entire world of technology just opened up to me. Like once I got stateside. Just for reference, like before I came to the States, I didn't even know like what Google was. And all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden I'm just like in this world where cell phones are all over the place. The internet is easily accessible. Digital cameras were starting to be a thing. The iPhone had come out, I think about 2, 3 years before that. And I was like, my goodness, there's a part of me that just unlocked that I didn't even know that was there. And that was the intellectual curiosity to try to understand the digital world, if I can
Mm-hmm.
summarize it. Um,
Yeah.
and so the podcasting entered my sphere, I suppose, about 4 years ago, because I wanted to share my early childhood memories. I just have like tons and tons and tons of memories. In fact, I'm currently in the process of writing a book, and like step zero of this process is going through all the different memories that I have of my childhood. So I wanted to share my early childhood memories, and then I also wanted to leave a legacy of sorts, right? So that one day I can look back and I can listen to my own voice. It sounds super dumb, but like where I was in the headspace, what was going on, and so
Mm. Yeah.
that I started it out of I was inspired to start, and then 2, 3 months down the road, I quit because I had no plan. I just the inspiration is what got me started, but it's hard work, dedication, and processes that get you that take you into the medium to long term side of things. So once I understood that, I came back about 6 to 9 months later, and now I still wanted to share my stories. I still wanted to explore my childhood and share my upbringing with other people. But at the same time, I wanted to explore all kinds of other stuff, right? And so the intellectual curiosity part of me wanted to interview individuals that have specific competencies in certain domains. But I was still all over the place. I wanted to talk to, like, for example, if I was really interested about, I don't know, the relationship between sleep and academic performance, I would bring on a sleep doctor type person and just have a conversation with them. But then the next day, I would be heavily interested in, I don't know, directed energy type stuff. So I got to find a physicist. So from one episode to the next, the topics could be very, very different. And now I am now entering the different phase of this podcasting, where it's now about focusing on people's stories, right? So going back to the
Mm.
original thing, which was I want to share my story. I wanna share my story, yes, but I also want to I want to focus on other people's stories, right? And starting from you know the earliest memory that they have all the way to us sitting there and having the conversation. But I would not have gotten here if I hadn't just dove deep, started off and just hit record and publish and make all kinds of mistakes. And so kind of like a sort of segue is like I'm trying to now help other people that are trying to start podcasts, but with the idea of, okay, I made all I made all the mistakes. There's plenty of mistakes for you to make too, but there's plenty of mistakes that you need to avoid. So anyways, I'm getting a little off tangent, but yeah, there you have it.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. So you came to the States in like '09,
Yep.
and then you started your podcast about 4 years ago or so. So almost like a little over a decade later, you got into the podcast arena.
Yeah.
So what was like pivotal moments or individuals in your life that led you towards podcast and sharing these meaningful conversations in that decade? You've discovered technology and you're really interested in this. And what were some of the pieces of the journey that led you from discovering that to discovering podcasting to being like, hey, I really want to capture these memories and start listening to other people's stories and capturing their stories?
Yeah, good question. So I don't think it was like one particular thing. It was that because the entire computer space was very new to me. I remember, I think 2010, early 2010 actually. So just a few months after I had arrived, I uploaded my first YouTube video. It might have been 2011. I'm not sure. Yeah, probably. Let's say 2011. And my English was still. I mean, I had just learned English like 9 months prior to that, and so I was making like a tutorial video on how to. For those that know about jailbreaking, you'll get a little kick out of this, but was teaching other people how to jailbreak their iPhones and how to get this illegal music application. Anyways, so I got into the YouTube space earlier on, and I would upload one video here, and then a year would go by, and then I would upload another video. So I was in the content creation space for the entire time, pretty much a year after I got here. And I got into podcasting. So the podcasting became a different medium to do what I was already doing, which was creating content, right? I don't know if you remember Vine. Did you play around with Vine?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I never played around with it, but I remember it, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So as soon as it came out, I was on top of that. I was making all kinds of nonsense videos, and so every platform that came out, I would jump on it. And so podcasting became another medium that I wanted to explore, that allowed for medium like a long form type of content. Right? It's not that YouTube doesn't do that, but podcasting was very different and unique from that standpoint. So I'm not answering your question directly, but there wasn't like one single thing that prompted me to start podcasting. It was just I was already so deep into the content creation space that podcasting became a different medium to explore a different part of my my content.
Yeah, that's cool. I see that, and it's interesting now as podcasting is coming, I guess maybe full circle into like this video space where it's becoming more and more popular to have video. It's basically become a YouTube video,
Right.
So it's interesting that journey's kind of come maybe full circle for you, where it's coming back to YouTube versus where you started almost.
Yeah, exactly. Are you on YouTube?
I am on YouTube. So I'm a musician and songwriter, and so probably 2010, 11, somewhere in there is when I uploaded my first video. It was just like music covers and stuff. So I've been similar journey to you, being on YouTube and uploading a different style of content, but still being a creator and looking for ways to share there. So yeah, to answer your question, but I was curious. You were talking about Vine.
Yeah.
How did that translate for you? Because Vine is more like I wasn't ever on there, but it's more like short form, like early TikTok or early Reels, right? Am I right with that?
Yeah. So it was like TikTok before TikTok, and it was even more constrained than TikTok because it started with I think 7 seconds.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it wasn't like a 15 or 30 seconds. It started with 7 seconds, and it just the amount of creativity that people were able to pack into 7 seconds. It was amazing. It was amazing. So R.I.P. to Vine.
Yeah. How is that going from a long form platform like YouTube to a platform like Vine? Was that just an interesting challenge for you, or what drew you to Vine?
Yeah, so for sure, it was a creative challenge in the sense that, I mean, how much can you actually do and or say in 7 seconds, right? And so now I'm going to respond this with the knowledge that I have now, not with the knowledge that I had then. But whenever you're creating content, you're either trying to educate or entertain. And those that do it really, really well, they are able to combine an educational factor and an entertainment factor in a way that does not take away from the other too much. You know what I mean? So if you're trying to be educational, but you end up being too entertaining, while the educational factor falls through the cracks, and then you fall into the entertainer category. And if you're trying to entertain and you end up being too educational, well, it's a completely different way of approaching it. So, and all you have is 7 seconds. So it was very, very challenging, but it was completely new. Everybody was just posting, 7 seconds of whatever. So I was doing some dancing stuff. I was just all over the place. So it was challenging. I'm kind of going all over the place now. I'm rambling, but yeah, there you have it.
That's awesome. I love that you were open to the challenge and that you were open to exploring that, because I remember Vine becoming a thing and I was like, man, I've got too much other stuff to worry about. Like I'm trying to figure out how to cover music and how to do this on YouTube.
Right.
And anytime something new like that popped up, I was like, I'm not interested in exploring that right now. And I think I just love that you were open to that. And I think that's a better mindset is what I'm trying to say.
No, it's just
for the listener's sake, like have that open mindset and being open to exploring more things is more beneficial to your life, I think, overall.
Right. And you can always go back to the established platforms, right? So if a new platform pops up and it's too gimmicky or whatnot, try it, figure out what the limitations that it has, and what creative process you have to get into in order to produce content that's tailored to that platform. You can always come back, or you can continue to produce content for the platform that you're already accustomed to. That's totally fine. But yeah, exploring different platforms is always it taps into a different part of your creativity.
Well, moving back to your podcast, Moses, how did you discover the unique perspective or message that you wanted to bring to your podcast and specifically to your audience?
Yeah. Man, I think I'm in many ways than one. I'm still on that journey, right? So I talked about wanting to explore, wanting to share my childhood memories, and then that evolved into wanting to satisfy my intellectual curiosity by having conversations with different experts from different domains of competence. And now I want to focus more on individual stories. And in the back of my mind, there's already another, not shift, but another narrower way. So for example, excuse me, I mentioned that I came stateside from Mozambique, but my background, I ended up in Mozambique as a refugee from Rwanda, right? So now I'm like, man, I want to, instead of in addition to focusing on individual stories, I want to focus, what if I focus more on stories of individuals that were refugees, right? So it's taken me perhaps much longer than other people as far as figuring out exactly what it is that they want to talk about and being able to maintain that topic, that genre across time. But once I narrowed that down, I'm looking super forward to that, because I feel like it's something that I can talk about. It's something that is close to my heart. It's part of who I am, and so I love to share my story, and I also love to hear other people's stories. And so if I can bring these stories of fellow refugees to light, of those that want to share, of course, it's not only is it beneficial to me selfishly, right? But it's also beneficial to other people whose stories haven't seen the light of day yet. So,
yeah, and it's such a powerful medium, storytelling, to be able to connect people to experiences they didn't have,
right.
To help them understand an experience that they've never gone through, and maybe understand a perspective that they have never thought about before.
Exactly.
That's a really powerful journey you can take people on with that, especially talking about refugees. For somebody like myself, growing up in the States, and having by the standard of a lot of people who've lived in the world outside of the States or had an experience like yours, I have had a very easy life, and I can't relate to that in the sense that you were talking about. I've not lived through anything like that. So hearing those stories and what people have gone through is so important.
Right. Yeah.
I love that. So what you've hosted, I've looked it up. You've been posting 70 some episodes so far. Is that right?
Yep.
Since 2021.
Right.
If I got those stats right.
Yep.
So through that period of time, what has your podcast taught you about yourself? What have you discovered that maybe surprised you in that journey?
Man, I I'm really good at BSing, but I already knew that.
Okay.
What I what I did know is how good I can be at BSing. Let me unpack that a little bit more. I fly with what's the saying? Flying off the seat of your pants. What's the saying? I forgot.
Fly by the seat of your pants.
Yeah. So I told you at the
Yeah.
beginning here that I applaud you for coming onto this conversation with pre-written questions, right? That's something that I've tried to do. It's just it hasn't worked yet. It hasn't worked yet. So I start with a completely blank sheet of paper. Well, a blank sheet of iPad. But by the end of my episodes, I'm full of questions. I'm full of notes, right? So maybe it's a different way of approaching it. But the thing that I've learned is that yes, I am a natural conversationalist, and I am able to come up with conversational topics on the spot. But if I were to just take even just 10, 15 minutes to write down 3 questions before every conversation on my podcast, 3 questions that if the podcast comes to an end, I can take the answers to those 3 questions and put them into practice into my own life, I would see immediate results. So that's what I have in the back of my mind, and I feel like that's what podcasting has taught me is that, I want to be able to have a very fruitful conversation, and by fruitful here, I define it as having 3 questions before the conversation starts and or throughout the conversation, and that those 3 questions have to be able to allow me to implement the answers to those questions into my life immediately after the conversation and see fruitful and see results. So I started off wrong by saying that I'm pretty good at BSing, but what I wanted to touch on that was that yes, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at like coming up with things at the top of my head. But if I just slow down a little bit, and I would benefit even more from each conversation, instead of instead of coming up with topics at the top of my mind. I would benefit a lot more. So, I don't know if that answers your question. But in my mind, it's like, I learned that I need to take my time with things, with conversations, and okay, actually, let me be even more specific. So I have this idea.
Go for it.
I have this idea that it's a conceptual idea, but in practice, is very difficult for me. And the idea is that whenever I'm having a conversation with someone, I have to instead of listening to respond, I have to truly listen. And one of the ways that I test that against myself is by the time that person finishes saying what they're saying, I have to repeat to them what they said. But not only that, I have to repeat it to the degree that they agree that my repetition is truly representative of what it is that they meant to say, right? So that really forces me to listen. And so I guess a solid answer to your question is that the biggest thing that I learned is that I really learned how to listen. And I feel like I'm going to unpack what that truly means for the next, 1,000 episodes to come.
Yeah. Wow. I love that answer, Moses. And I love that you unpacked it and took me on that journey through your mind of getting there to where you landed. And I can totally relate to that too. That is I also am somebody who flies by the seat of my pants. And my wife, she's not somebody like that. So it's been good for me to be married to her because it's helped me learn some of her skills.
Yeah.
But also, like when you're talking about just slowing down to listen and to respond to what the person is actually saying, that's definitely a skill set that I'm trying to learn as well. So I feel that pain point with you, and I've even in this conversation, it's something that I'm working on too. I'm thinking about what question I should ask next, or how I should respond to this, rather than trying to just take in what you're giving me purely at that level and say, okay, just what is Moses exactly trying to communicate here? So thank you for that reminder. That's huge, man.
Yeah, of course it takes practice. It's not an easy thing to do, and I'm not nowhere near good at it. Like I said, it's gonna take
Yeah.
the next like 1,000 episodes or so before I can even like
Mhm.
get better at it. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, are there any episodes or interviews that you've done that have had a lasting impact on you personally or professionally?
Oh man, really put me on the spot. If any guests that I've had ever come across this episode, I'm cooked. Uh,
No, let's say that they've all had an impact, but like the one, as you're looking back right now, the conversation that stands out the most right now for whatever reason.
yeah, jeepers. Oh, there's just one conversation that's coming to mind right away. I don't know why. I don't know if it's like impact as in I've taken the things that they've said in that episode and put them into practice. But I was having a conversation with a gentleman by the name Roberto Capodieci. It's an Italian name. So if you are watching this, hi. And he was talking about the importance of decentralization. So decentralization of information, decentralization of currencies, decentralization of banking system, decentralization of all the digital stuff. And the entire conversation, that the entire episode, I was just so sucked in. One, because that's just a buzzword for me. Like I have just a super superficial understanding of what that means. And also like the first 20 minutes was about us, well, him, and learning languages and traveling. And as someone that speaks, 5, 6 languages, I was like, okay, we're definitely deep into this. So that's like one that comes to mind right away. Man, it's not it's not fair because there's so many good conversations. I'm thinking about Susie. I forgot her name. She was sharing some, well, I guess was a personal story there, but how she dealt with okay, well, maybe it's not my place to tell her story and do an injustice to it. But if you go to my podcast and find Susie and listen to that episode, it's a very touching story. Yeah, I don't have one, man. I don't have one specific one.
Okay.
Do you?
That's great, man. So to be honest, I'm fairly fresh and new on this podcasting journey. This is episode like 19, I think, if I remember correctly.
Let's go.
And this is, yeah, man. And so this is the third interview that I've done for the podcast. So
sweet.
Out of those though, like the conversation that has impacted me the most was a conversation with Anthony K. Doe. Okay. He's a creative entrepreneur. He grew up in Canada, but he's kind of been a digital nomad for the last 10 years.
Oh, cool.
And in our conversation, we talked about how to turn your passion into profit and how he's done that through making videos for like high-end luxury brands and kind of his journey through that. And as an artist and a musician myself, it was just an experience and an encounter and a conversation where I was talking with somebody who is living at such a high level of artistry that it was just like it fed my artist soul to have that kind of a conversation and to go deep with somebody else in their art and understand their perspective and their view of their art. And so, yeah, man, that conversation has been my top conversation so far. And he's a fantastic storyteller, both visually and with the way that he writes out his scripts and things like that. And so just studying his work and that conversation and trying to take away bits and pieces of how to tell stories as well has been really impactful for me.
Wow, that's really sweet, man.
So impactful that that was episode 8. And so at episode 10, I decided to do like a recap of the first 10 episodes. So I was like, cool, this is what I accomplished in the first 10. Yeah. These next 10 episodes, I want to focus on storytelling more. Okay. Not that I'm going to be a master of that by the end of that, but hoping that I'm getting better at telling stories and at pulling stories out of other people that come on the podcast and that sort of thing. So just an emphasis on storytelling. That's probably the takeaway that I've had from that conversation with Anthony.
Man, okay, that's awesome. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it has been. So Moses, moving into the Cabandana, man, I'm going to get this.
Yeah.
Cabandana.
Yes, sir.
Is that right?
Yep.
Cabandana Academy.
Yep.
I assume that this came after the podcast. Am I correct in that? Or is that okay. All right. So what inspired you to take the leap from being a podcaster and a content creator to founding your academy and to becoming an educator for aspiring podcasters?
Yeah. So it just started with like, once in a while, someone would ask, "Hey, I like the microphone that you have. Like, what is it? What are you using?" Okay, and then I share that. Okay, what's your post production process like? What's your pre-production process like? How do you find guests? Which camera are you using? Which lens are you using? What lighting are you using? And after getting all those questions, just periodically, right? Then it started to be one of those things that's like, well, one of the YouTube channels that I had has since been dissolved, slash changed to a different thing, was to make tutorials, right? And it was either tutorials or reviews of cameras, reviews of lenses, computers, and whatnot. So I already knew by just receiving feedback from the viewers that I have an ability to present information in small and digestible chunks that are well received. So I already knew how to structure information. And so I was like, well, maybe I can put these two things together and create a short course, right? And the idea there was specifically, I was trying to, someone is listening to this, they want to take this idea, I guess, be my guest. But I was trying to help my local university here because they were trying to start, different faculty members wanted to start a podcast, and they just didn't know what's keeping them from actually starting a podcast. Because, they are experts in their different fields of competence. They are at a university, so they have film and media departments with all the cameras and all the microphones and everything. Yet, they couldn't start a podcast. So there was a barrier there that was keeping them from starting a podcast. And so I had a conversation with a few people there, and I was like, for them specifically, the barrier was time, right? So maybe I can start a short course showing them how to start a podcast just using their smartphone. I know if you're a professional podcaster, you just puked in your mouth. That's fine. But the idea was just, there's a problem here, and all the expensive equipment is not doing the job because they have access to it, but they're still, not producing their podcasts. So that's what sparked the idea of creating Cabandana Academy, bringing together the review / tutorial YouTube part of me, and just a person that has a podcast and trying to teach people how to start it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was like this starting point, the thing that sparked it, that made me wanna share that knowledge with people online.
Nice, yeah. And how long ago did that idea spark for you, or did you embark on this journey?
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, and then I sat on it for about 9 months, more or less.
Okay.
Maybe 6 months. And so I think this April it's gonna be a year since I've actually put pen and paper, talking to professors and just people outside of the faculty. Just the average person that wants to start a podcast, whether that's a friend of mine that saw a podcast or someone that watched my podcast or a podcast clip on Instagram or something, and then incorporating the business and all of that. So it will be a year this April. So, but yeah, the thought
Nice.
and just the thought of starting Cabandana Academy had been there for about a year and a half. It's just taking the step, the first step, and incorporating the company is about almost a year.
Okay, awesome! Congratulations, man. That is exciting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think I've gathered from what you just said what the core mission is of Cabandana Academy, but I want to hear it in your own words. Like, what's the core mission of Cabandana Academy?
Putting me on the spot again. So very simple, man.
I'm sorry, man.
No, you're good. You're good. It's because I'm so passionate about sharing my own story. I want to enable other individuals to be able to share theirs, right? And it doesn't have to be, their upbringing stories per se, but whatever voice that they want to share. And I want to facilitate their ability to share that through podcasts. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, that kind of the second part of that question was, how does it empower podcasters to create sustainable, impactful content? And I think you kind of covered that. Is there any part of that you want to touch on too, with the mission and how it helps people, how it empowers podcasters to create sustainable and impactful content?
Yeah, so the empowering part is, at least from where I'm standing at, is reducing friction, right? Reducing friction. Because there's just every aspect of podcasting, depending on like how deep you want to go into it, it requires a specific competence, right? So, for example, you can be so good at podcasting that you end up hiring a sound engineer, right? You might end up needing to hire someone that is an audio editor, a video editor, a marketer. So every aspect of podcasting has a domain of competence that it requires all kinds of expertise. But we can't be all that at the same time, right? Now we have to be, we have to be, but we're not going to be able to be to the nth degree competent in all those things, right? So can we reduce the friction to a point where just the average individual can record good sound, good video, edit the things that they don't want or the things that they want to keep in, and being able to just have good lighting, make sure that the content is clear, is high quality content, and being able to understand just the point A to point B of producing their podcast. So reducing that friction, that will be very impactful, because then it allows more people to be able to share their voices. And then the sustainable part of it is, well, if the process is so complex, well, how many episodes are going to be able to do a month? Right? You also have a full-time job. You have this, you have that to do. So just really reducing the friction and the barrier of entry into podcasting really allows the most amount of people to be able to share their voices across time. And that's the part that I really care most about is, can you have a show that lasts time, that lasts, I don't want you to start and then 3 months down the road, your show, is done, or 9 months down the, unless it's by design, right? Maybe you have 6 months and you're done with it. But it's the longevity part of the podcasting that I aim to focus more on. And so I feel like none of that is going to be possible with a question mark there, or with an asterisk, if we do not reduce the friction and the barrier of entry into podcasting. That's my 2 cents there.
I like that. So Moses, in your opinion, what let's give the listeners one area of friction that you love to help decrease for podcasters in your academy.
Yeah. Planning. It's something that I'm absolutely terrible at. And I think I mentioned this at the beginning, that I started my podcast and then 3 months down the road, I quit, right? I hadn't planned, right? I hadn't planned. And so the reason I focus on planning is because, well, one, it makes me a better podcaster, right? Because I'm terrible at planning. So it's already a weakness of mine that by focusing on it, I end up it ends up becoming a strength, if that makes any sense. But also, when you spend the right amount of time in the planning stage, everything else becomes not a breeze, right? Not a breeze, but it facilitates so many other things down the road, right? So I mentioned, right now I'm recording this in a small town in India, and I'm using, I don't know if I don't have a video on, but I have the Sennheiser MKE 600. It is a condenser microphone. If you ask anybody about condenser microphones, they'll say you shouldn't use them in untreated environments, and that would be 100% true, right? But it also takes a AA battery, so that and it has an XLR input. So typically, with XLR input, then you end up needing some sort of a phantom power, some sort of like a power supply there. So I'm going off a tangent, but it's to show that
that's all right.
All the equipment that I have I had to think about it way ahead of time, right? And so now, if I have power, if I don't have power, I'm totally fine, right? Now, we had all kinds of technical difficulties at the beginning, right? But the fact that I'm currently not plugged in, I have a Sony A6700 plugged in directly into my computer. Like nothing is plugged in at all into the wall, and I'm able to go for hours and hours. And you're gonna be able to take this sound, you're gonna edit it. It's gonna sound phenomenal. It's gonna sound phenomenal. So all of this is because of planning. A lot of trial and error, a lot of mistakes, a lot of buying the wrong microphones, figuring out that I need an entire audio interface because I bought this microphone, but I travel a lot, so I cannot bring this with me. I can't bring that. I can't bring. I'm rambling on now, but I focus mainly on planning because when it's during the planning stage that I help. I identify the things that, depending on your use case, right, bring down even more the friction of podcasting. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the lens that I look through when it comes to podcasting. Is just let's plan better. let's plan better.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great place to start to tear down those walls of friction, because that is, I would argue, that's probably the number one killer of podcasters. Is like you were saying with your story, like we get excited about an idea,
right,
and we're like, man, let's go. This is going to be great. I've got to record this.
Right.
And you get, a few episodes in and you're like, oh, wow, this is a lot of work. How am I going to sustain this?
Right. Yep.
So, yeah. And to speak to your part about, not planning, not being your strong suit. Like, I'm an educator as well. That's how I've made my bread and butter for the last 10 years, is teaching piano lessons. And I can personally attest to, like, what you're not good at. If you start teaching it, that is honestly the best way to learn it.
Sweet.
And that's been my use case with teaching. I wasn't a great sight reader when I started teaching, and I was like, I want my students to be able to read music really well. And I've been able to, my sight reading has increased.
Wow.
I mean, I don't even know what kind of number to put on it, but it's so much better now than it was when I finished schooling and started teaching. So
that's awesome.
What you teach is what you get really good at.
Yeah. So a quick comment here. So you mentioned piano lessons. So when I first arrived stateside, I started piano lessons, right? Because I love to play piano by ear, right? So I was like really excited to take these piano lessons, and then I was introduced to this thing called like reading and stuff. Like the instructor opened the book and there was like all these symbols, and I was like, oh, I thought we're gonna be like playing. He's like, well, yeah, but we gotta be reading. I said, I didn't sign up for reading. Like I didn't know that there was like a reading. I didn't know that there was like a reading aspect of music, which was just, it's kind of dumb of me, but excuse me. But yeah, I still want to learn how to play a guitar, piano.
So did you stick with that and learn quite a bit with reading, or that wasn't for you at that time?
Well, he wasn't gonna budge on the reading, so I wasn't gonna budge.
So you're like, yeah, not for me.
Yeah. I should have stuck with it. Because even to this day, I still play. But I'll listen to a melody or something, and then I'll try to find my way around the keyboard. But eventually, I would love to be able to sit down, read some musical notes and play and follow along. And but no, I did. I didn't go through with it. No.
Yeah. Well, total side tangent and way off track, but I do have a free 5-day sight reading course on my music education site. I can send you later if you're interested, if it's something you want to look into. So
I might hold you up to that in a couple of years.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you let me know, man, when you're ready.
Yes,
so cool. We've talked about empowering podcasters through the mission of Cabandana Academy. Let's talk about Podfade a little bit, because that's kind of the theme of this episode, is how do we be sustainable as podcasters and as creators? And the amount of people who, I call it the 6% club, who get to 100 episodes, it's like 6% of podcasters. So like 94% chance that you're going to fail as a podcaster. Those are terrifying odds.
Yeah.
When you start, if you're thinking about doing this long term, that's like, wow, the odds are really stacked against me. So how do you guide students to sustain creativity and avoid that pod fade through your programs? We've talked about reducing friction. What are other ways that you help students and help podcasters be sustainable?
Good question. So one of the first things that I it's gonna sound like, I'm stomping on people's dreams, but one of the things that I emphasize at the beginning is that inspiration is what gets you started, but it's not what's gonna make you produce one episode after the other. Right? It's a great thing to have, and it's a great thing to hold on to across time. Right? Just remember, why is it that you decided to start a podcast? If your reason is strong enough, well, yeah, you're gonna be able to endure through the burnouts. So I focus on that first. It's like, okay, you are inspired. Great. I am inspired for you, right? But just let's grab onto that inspiration, and let's remind ourselves over and over again, why is it that we're starting a podcast? So focus on the why, but also understand that inspiration is going to fade, maybe like 3 weeks, 3 weeks later. So instead, let's combine our inspiration with a proven system that has a lot that it incorporates a lot less thinking and a lot more systemized and automated steps, right? So, for example, if every episode that you produce has an intro and an outro, well, let's create an editing template, right? It's something that it has everything that you do every single time anyways, right? It's a small thing. It might take 20 minutes to build, but every time that you open that editing template, you already, let's say, 15% into the editing process, and all you had to do is just open the editing template, right? Okay, so that's like one part. That's like in the podcast editing side. Well, what do you do before, if you have guests, for example? Like, what's your process of finding a guest? Do you reach out through different? Do you have a CRM? Do you DM people? Are there like specific messages that you send them? How do they book a slot with you? Right? Like, figure out every single aspect of your podcast production and figure out where is it that you can create an automated system. So right now, when someone wants to be on my podcast, I take their name, I take their email, I put it into a CRM, and they get the email, they get the reminders, they get everything is automated. Everything is automated. So right there, I just took the post-production side and I decreased the like how much time goes into it. Let's say 15%. I'm pulling this number out of my rear end, but and then I took the pre-production side, finding a guest and everything. Also improved that by 15%. Okay, what about once you've edited and you've published the episode? Do you create like small clips? Do you share those clips on social media? Like, what is it that you do? And what can we automate there? So right now, like once an episode is out, I'm not sponsored by Riverside or anything, but Riverside has this program where it generates multiple clips. I go through those clips. Sometimes it does a completely terrible job. I find those clips that truly represents the meats and potatoes of that episode, extract those out. I put it into my CRM, and I schedule them to go on all kinds of different social media platforms at a specific date. And I take maybe 20 minutes to do that. And now I can have a content calendar, so to speak, that I don't have to be like on top of it every single minute, right? It's done. I take 20 minutes to do all of this. maybe 45 minutes per episode, right? Sometimes there's an episode that's a bit more difficult to edit or whatnot. But once you've done 10, 20, 30, 50 episodes and you look back on them, you figure out, okay, what are the things that occur more often? Like, what are the things that I just end up doing that are very, very repeatable and predictable, and you automate that, right? So I think I forgot what the question is, but these are some of the efficiencies that I focus on, because they help avoid burnout. 15% here, 50% there, and this is one thing that I really like to do, is taking breaks. Taking breaks. I'm gonna bifurcate that a little bit and say there's two ways that I find that most people appreciate when it comes to taking breaks. One, it can be through the process of batch production, right? So producing 5, 10, 15 episodes. 15, that's quite a lot, but 5 episodes, right? So that maybe there's a vacation coming up, maybe there's a program that coming up that you want to be a part of, maybe you want to take off 1 month, 2 months off from your podcast. Producing those podcasts ahead of time and putting them through the pipeline, so that when it's time, they just automatically go live and whatnot, and you're not missing any episodes, and you get to relax a little bit. The other part of it is taking not a sabbatical, but just saying, hey, I release podcasts January through June, and then I don't produce any podcasts July and August. I think that's the order of months, and so you pick certain times of the year to not produce any podcasts, and you communicate that with your audience. Hey, we're coming up on the last episode. I will see you in 3 months or whatever, right? Or 2 months. Yes, there are consequences, good consequences and bad consequences from each strategy, but communicating that strategy with your audience goes a long ways. So those are like a few nuggets that I found that work really, really well to avoid medium to long term burnout. Because the last thing that you want is to start to grow resentment towards your own show and your audience. It's a bad place to be. It's a bad place to be. So we can avoid that at all costs. So it's good for you. It's good for your audience. I mean, there's of course the fear that, man, if I stop posting for a couple of months and the audience is going to go somewhere else and this and that, and there's a certain level of validity to that concern, but the degree to which it's valid versus the reality of that validity, there are few. It's not even close. It's not even close. It's a fear that is there, but it doesn't hold true like in the medium to long term. Again, we're focusing on the medium to long term side of things, and not just being able to say that I produced 100 episodes a year over year, but you're slowly starting to hate everything about your podcasting, and then that makes its way into how you approach podcasting, and then your audience starts to feel. I mean, it's no bueno. So yeah.
So Moses, you mentioned in that developing resentment towards your podcast or towards your show. Has that been something you've personally experienced in your podcasting journey?
I've experienced some elements of that. So like let's say more specifically the editing process, right? So if I record, let's say 5 episodes in like 3 weeks. So I have a few episodes that I can sit on, right? But dang it, now I gotta edit 5 episodes, right? And yes, I've created a system that facilitates the process, but I'm starting to fall out of love with the editing side, and it's terrible because like I used to love the editing side because it's like, okay, I'm like the amount of things that I've found in the editing stage, that I was like, wait a minute, when did they say this? Like, holy smokes, I gotta write this down. And I only found that when I was like re-listening to these episodes. But when I started to like really hate the editing process, like, oh my goodness, we went for 40 minutes. 40 minutes we spoke back and forth. Oh my goodness. it starts to sip its way into my entire, my mood, and then that does not do any justice to the next episode that I have to edit.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like, and then the guest for that podcast ends up taking the blunt of my mood, just because I don't want to take a break, or I don't want to say, hey, okay, it's okay if I miss a month. It's okay if I miss 2 months. I've communicated that with my audience. They know that there's going to be a couple of months with no podcast. And I've communicated with the guests. Hey, you are 3, 10, well, not 10. 5 is the most that I've had. You're like 5, 10, 3 to 5 episodes behind. I will let you know when your podcast goes live. So I don't want to, I don't want to like drag this further out, but I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to touch a little bit more on the taking a break with your podcast, because that's not typical advice that you're going to find. A lot of people are like, you're going to lose your audience if you do that. And you've talked about the positive and negative impacts or consequences, I guess, of that. What has been, could you give like a small, brief like case study of maybe your podcast or like students' podcasts who you've advised to do that, and the benefits that they've seen? I hear the benefit. I just want to give you space if there's a small case study that you could share with us on that.
Yeah, I can use my own right now. It's the first month of the year now. We're in January, and my goal for this year was to increase the frequency of my episodes. So last year the goal was, okay, can we do one episode a week? Can we maintain that? For the year, and I think we did it. There might be like a month or two that I didn't post anything, and in that time I was like, man, this is really bad, because I did not even tell my audience that I was gonna be gone. So maybe I'm preaching something that I'm not practicing. Oh my goodness, what? Right? And that too is true, right? But this year I was like, well, we were able to maintain. We were able to produce one episode a week, pretty much every week last year. Maybe, like I said, there might be like 4 weeks or so that we skipped. This year we're gonna do two episodes every week. All of a sudden, I'm like, well, I have so much on my plate this month. I'm not gonna post anything this month. I haven't posted a single episode this month, and it's also the same time that I'm shifting to focus more on people's stories, and so I'm at a point where on the guest side, I'm lucky enough where I have a backlog of guests that have requested to be on the podcast. But like I said, now I just shifted to focusing more on people's stories. So those people that are backlogged, some of them messaged back in November, September, and their topics were completely different, right? They wanted to come on and talk about, let's say, I don't know, tech or coaching and whatnot. But now I want to focus more on people's stories. So are you still gonna come on or not? And anyways, that's a long way of saying that it's in my own podcast. I'm starting to see that for this month I'm not gonna post anything. Right? Is that good? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Am I worried that I'm gonna lose some audiences? No, not really, because like again, this is a medium to long term perspective, and the likelihood that I'm gonna lose like 90% of my listeners because I didn't post a little bit and I didn't tell them, it's very low. It's very low. Again, being able to communicate with my audience. Hey guys, hey listen, there's a lot of shifts happening on my end. I am planning on releasing 2 episodes every week, but in order for that to happen, there's going to be some changes. So there's going to be a couple of a few weeks that I'm going to go without posting. But stay tuned, because you get the point, right? So being able to communicate that with the audience is pretty huge.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that emphasis on stepping back when you need to, so that you can continue to produce what you're doing at a high quality and level. That I don't feel like that's an advice that's given a lot out there. The advice that's given is like figure out how to be consistent and just lock in.
Yeah.
So I love this viewpoint that you're bringing of just figuring out what you actually need as the host and the producer of your show, and doing that so that you can produce a quality show in the long run, and think about the medium to long-term goals rather than the short-term goal of, oh, I have to produce an episode this week.
Right. Well, and to add a little bit more to that, it's like an analogy that I like to give is, like when you're on an airplane and then they're making those announcements, in case of an emergency, yada, yada, yada. They don't say, grab a mask and give it to your neighbor first, right? It's like put the mask on yourself first. Like, be in a place where you can survive and be in a state where you can actually be of benefit to others, right? And at the end of the day, at least for my podcast, I'm trying to be of benefit selfishly to myself, right? Because I want to get a lot of life by listening to other people's stories, but I also want to share my story. And these stories are impactful, right? Whether it's whatever your podcasting thing is, maybe it's like personal development, maybe it's business, maybe it's, fill in the blank. You become more impactful when you yourself when your cup is full, so to speak. So that's the angle that I'm coming from. Don't hesitate. Like if you miss an episode, you'll be fine. Like you said that, what was it? It's only 6% of podcasts make it to 100 episodes. So if you miss a few episodes here and there, you'll be fine. Again, as long as you are filling your own cup, right? So that you can last in this really, really long marathon. That's a good place to focus.
Yeah, I think maybe what I'm hearing you, and maybe this is not so clear. I want to clarify what I'm hearing you say is, like take care of yourself and figure out what you need first.
Absolutely.
So that you can continue on. Be intentional with your decisions.
Right.
If you want to go week to week, that's fine. But make sure that you're ready for that. If you're not ready for that and you need to step back, be intentional and make that plan with yourself and say it's okay to step back.
Right. And communicate that with your audience.
Yeah. Cool. I love that advice, man. That is definitely not something I feel like you get in the podcasting world as far as people who are educating and helping people get going with their podcasters. So I appreciate that viewpoint, and I think it's very valuable.
I think so too. And it's not always received with open arms. But like I said, if you're really focused on medium to long term, I feel like it has to be part of the equation. Otherwise, burnout is just right around the corner. And you don't have to try hard to burn out. Like, you don't have to go looking for burnout. It's looking for you always. So
yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, and I think that's the key point of what you said. I think if you're not focused on the medium to long term goal, I think it's easy to push that advice away. But I think if you're looking at that, I think that's the big key differential there.
What's been your experience with burnout?
Well, that's a great question. Again, being somebody that's not been used to planning for the long term, it's just, I've typically been somebody who has been inspired, and you get excited about a project or a program, and so I go and build it really quickly, and don't really think about the long-term success of it. And I've definitely burned myself out several times through the course of my creative life. There was a time that I was helping lead a lot of worship music at my church, and just, did it way too much for way too long, way too consistently, and got to a place where it just wasn't fun. And I had to step back because I wasn't, I didn't have anything to give. Like you were saying, my cup wasn't filled, so there was nothing for me to give to anybody else. So I can't continue to be in that space.
Right.
Same thing with writing music and doing things that way. And so that's kind of the podcaster's journey. This podcast is kind of born out of that, where I'm like, I've burned myself out several times in creative endeavors. And so this time, as I start to go into the podcasting world and be on this side of the microphone, I want to help create frameworks and workflows for podcasters, and at least, just have open conversations and have an open diary for people to listen to say, oh, well, this worked out for Caleb. Maybe I should try that, or that didn't work out, or, that didn't work out in Moses's journey, and just have these conversations so that other people can can learn from them. So that's kind of the heart of this podcast is helping people, just do things sustainably and
Yeah.
in a way that's going to impact and have the most chance for you to impact the people that you're trying to impact with your art or with your content.
I love it. Thanks for sharing, man. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for asking. That was a great question. So we are a little over time, Moses. So I want to be thoughtful of your time. If you've got time, I've got a couple more questions. But if we need to wrap it up here, so I want to put the ball in your court. I'm not sure what your need is for time here.
Bring them.
Okay. All right, cool. So how do you balance teaching podcasting frameworks with encouraging individual creativity and expression in your students in your program?
Rephrase that a little.
Okay. So when you're trying to bring to your students these systems or ways to reduce the friction, are there ways that you still encourage individual creativity and expression through their podcast, even though you're trying to help them alleviate some of these things by giving them systems?
Yeah. I think I understand the question. So it depends on the type of students. And so far, there's like two major groups. One is more like me. They just move fast, break things, learn your way, and then say, "Hey, Moses, here's what I did. Now walk me through the best way that I could have approached it." Right? And then the other group is I need every single detail in its place before I even entertain the idea of hitting record. And both of them are just as right, and both of them are able to explore their level of creativities. There's no right or wrong. What I do look for more is is their level of input authentic, right? So for example, especially when people are starting out, right? It's like you're so enthusiastic and so fired up to start the podcast, and you want to try this, you want to try that, and again, it's always like, okay, that's good, I'm there with you, right? But can we sustain this level of creativity across time, right? If you want to have this intro, this outro, all kinds of different transitions in the middle. You want to bring this, you want to bring that. Great, love it. Do you think we're able to do this week in, week out? Assuming that they're going to be like a weekly podcast. If the answer is heck yes, then I'm typically like, okay, let's do that for 3 weeks. And then let's come back to this question, right? Because typically after those 3 weeks, or let's say 3 episodes, it's typically like, okay, yeah, maybe not. Maybe I can't maintain this level of creativity at the frequency of release, right, per episode. So I'm kind of like a soul crusher a little bit on that side, but being able to balance creativity with longevity. That's a very tough thing to do, because as a creative, you want to create left and right, but then there's the medium to long term sustainability of just the groundwork of podcasting, and there isn't much creativity in that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's 2 ways that I approach it.
Yeah, I think so, and. Man, I just love your approach to creating content and putting the creator of the content, their well-being ahead of the content. I think that's something we don't see a lot of, like I've already mentioned, and I think that's really valuable to people to continue to be sustainable as they move forward.
Yeah, well, and it's like it's the Wild West of podcasting, right? Something that is 100% true today might not be true like 2-3 years from now. So one of the things that I like to say is that because I'm trying to be more biased towards planning, right? Even if you had the absolute perfect plan for your podcast launch, if you never hit record, none of it matters, right? So you can
Yeah.
plan all you want. If you never hit record, it doesn't, it doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
that's typically where the move fast, break things types are like, yeah, that's why I just move fast and break things. So there's room for both. There's room for both. But you don't want to siphon out that fire. You don't want to put out that fire too early. You don't want to empty your cup too fast. I mean, I feel like you kind of need someone alongside you, or if you don't have that in you, right? You need someone to constantly remind you, hey, we are burning our candles really fast. Let's slow down and yeah. It's a tough balance. It's a
Yeah.
tough balance, especially for
Yeah.
creatives.
Yeah. And I love that you're being honest with your students as well. I think that's something some of us, I know myself as an educator, when I started, I would be too positive with students and not give them the hard truth and not give them, hey, well, we really need to set up this kind of system or set up this kind of a practice regiment for you. And as I've gone through my teaching career over the last 10 years, it's something that I've had to learn, like, hey, it actually hurts your students when you're not going to be upfront and
Right.
really honest with them about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So Moses, as we look to the future for your podcast and Cabandana Academy, what's next for you? Is there any exciting projects or any news that you want to share that's on the horizon?
Man, there's a lot. There's a lot. So maybe I can break it down into like three different segments. So one
Sure.
is obviously like my own podcast, right? Moving fast, breaking things has led me to, was it 2.5 years of solid podcast production, but without moving forward in one particular genre, right? And that was by design, right? So okay, this might change in 3 months, it might change in 9 months. I don't know. I'm not gonna wait until I have like the perfect plan. Let me just start, recording my stuff. Let me start bringing on guests. Okay, now I have an influx of guests. Awesome. Okay, now let me be a bit more choosy on who comes to the podcast and what do they share. Okay, awesome. We're there. Okay. Right. So that's like one side is okay, just focusing on my own podcast and not only bring more of my story to my own to my own episodes, but also focus more on telling other people's stories. I think I've beaten that horse to death now. The other side is the Cabandana Academy side is trying to figure out like truly how to best serve other students, right? How to best serve students. And there's trial and error in this too. There's trial and error because different people are at varying degrees of technical know-how, right? There's sometimes I'm getting on a Zoom call with I hope she's not watching this. Well, no, she is, maybe. So there's this like lady, super sweet, and she's taking on DaVinci Resolve for the first time, right? I think she's in her late 60s, I think, and she was specifically trying to learn how to create an editing template, right? So I mean, on the technical know-how, she's at like -0 and she knows it, but she's super excited about, okay, there's this program and it does audio, maybe it does also video. Moses, like, what is happening? Where do I click? Right. So there is her, but then there's all the way to someone who already has their own YouTube channel. They already know how all this stuff works. But there's something slightly different about this platform, this podcasting space, and every single one of those, I have to approach them differently, right? So how can I best serve each student based on their technical know-how and also how they like to be served, right? Because that's different too. So that's that's another side, and then the other side is a new venture, more or less, that is like, okay, maybe you just don't even want to like focus on the podcast creation side of things. You just want to record and you want me to take care of the rest. Okay, this is the new arm of Cabandana Academy. It's like, okay, you just focus on recording, right? Create your content, share your voice, and just let me and my team handle the rest, right? You record, you give it to us, we do all the magic, we give it to you, you upload. Heck, if you want us to upload and do all that, the clips and promotion and stuff, we'll do that too, right? But there's the teacher part of me that also, always wants to bring that type of person to see what are we actually doing behind the scenes, like how are we approaching the editing of their podcast, so they get to see some of the stuff too, right? So those are like three things that are on the horizon. Well, that we're actively working on right now, and talking about that whole having to stop and not burn out. This is a very good time to slow down for me, right? But at the same time, it's like you don't want to slow down because things are starting to like really, really pick up. But if I don't practice this slowing down at these early stages, I'm really lying to myself and saying that 5-10 years from now, then I'm gonna be able to slow down. That's probably true, but I don't want to slow down because I am made to slow down. I want to be able to slow down by choice before I'm made to slow down. So practicing that right now, it's been really, really, really good. Because it's one thing to slow down once things are really, really going well and trying to learn what that means. It's another thing to say, okay, we are in the middle of growth, but we're gonna slow down a little. We're gonna slow down a little, rejuvenate, fill up our cup. We're not gonna come down to 0 miles an hour, but we're going at 75. We're on the highway right now, borderline breaking the speed limit. Let's bring it down to 35. We're still moving. And 3-4 weeks down the road, bring it back to 75. So I hope that metaphor makes sense there. But
yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. So Moses, as we close, are there any calls to action you want to leave with the listener today? If you had one thing that you wanted them to do from today's episode, what would that be? If
the listener, if you don't have a podcast right now, if you don't have a podcast at all, the advice that I have for you is hit record on your phone. Just start sharing all kinds of stories. Learn, get used to listening to your own voice. Many of us vomit whenever we listen to our own voices, so just get used to that. But don't wait for the perfect plan. Right? If you already have a podcast, please start looking into creating sustainable systems that can last across time. And none of this might make sense depending on where you are in your journey. If it doesn't make sense, great. If it doesn't make any sense, maybe Google it. I won't put out my services out there right now, just because, like I said, we're going really, really fast, and we're entering into the season of slowing down a little. But if you want to listen to the Moses Kabandana podcast, listen to it. I would really appreciate that. Yeah. Any feedback that I can get from listeners, it's amazing.
And Moses, where can they find your podcast?
On any podcast listening platform. So if you go to Spotify, if you go to Apple Podcast, and you just type in the Moses Kabandana, it's a really long last name. I need to change my last name. I don't know.
No, man, own it. It's great.
If you just, the Moses Kabandana podcast, wherever you're listening to your podcast, is a very good place to start. And I really, really appreciate any feedback. And if it's an audio related feedback, awesome. If it's content related, awesome. I'm not too big to receive any feedback. And if you do want to work with me, then you can message me on wherever you find me. If it's on Instagram. Or send me an email at academy@cabandanaacademy.com. And I'll be happy to share my 2 cents. But like I said, right now, kind of slowing down. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and I'm going to add all those links down below in the description or in the show notes. So definitely go and find Moses and listen to his podcast. Moses, thank you so much for coming on today and just having a conversation with me. This has been fantastic.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And just real quick, last comment that I have here for you. How can I be of service to you, Caleb?
And that's a great question. I think I would have a similar request to what you just put out to the listener, just for feedback so far as to how this, whether that's from you specifically, Moses, how this interview went, what I could have done better as an interviewer, or any other content you may happen to check out from mine. And I'd love to have feedback, same as what you said. Like, I'm definitely open to learning and just figuring out how to do this better and find new systems that help and pass those along to the listeners. So any way you feel that you could enrich that in my journey on this podcaster's journey, I would be thrilled to have that.
Awesome. I'll send you about 2 pages worth of feedback. I'm kidding. You're doing great. You're doing great,
Perfect.
Man. You're really doing great. You're killing it. Keep doing what you're doing, man.
Well, thank you, Moses. Yeah, I'm bummed we weren't able to get the video on your side, but I'm so thrilled that you're traveling the world and getting to have these experiences, and I'm thrilled that we were able to still connect over audio on this today. So
awesome, man. Awesome. Let's keep in touch. Let me know when the episode goes up. I'm super proud that you're doing this and the fact that we connected on, I think it was Facebook at some point ago, and then that led to us having this conversation. So let's try to figure out how is it that we can be of best service to those that want to get into the podcasting space. So thanks a lot, man.
I love it. Yeah. Thank you, Moses.
Yep. Bye now.
Okay, well, there you have it. There's the interview with Moses. I'm just so grateful for Moses taking the time to come on and share his perspective and just his expertise in the world of podcasting and content creation and how we as creators can be more sustainable. And I loved the idea that he had of really taking care of ourselves and stepping back and just this advice to not try to be so consistent that it's detrimental to yourself, to always be working to have your own cup full, to have something to pour out to other people. So that's the big thing that I have to take away from that today, and I hope you take that away as well. I do want to remind you of Moses' call to action is just take the time to plan out your podcast, but remember to hit record sooner rather than later. So until next time, guys, I hope that you have a great week and happy podcasting.